Hi there. My name is Rajeswari Ramani. Welcome to Asian Agribiz podcast. Today, Arif Fakhruddin is speaking to Doug Korver, Professor Emeritus at the University of Alberta and President of Alpine Poultry Nutrition Incorporated in Canada, about the trend in layers where birds are kept longer and longer.
Let's move to your project in layer, which is about
Sure.
the trend where birds are kept longer and longer. What are the challenges of practicing this? And what kinds of nutritional interventions that we can do to overcome the challenges?
Yeah. So again, the primary breeders, the geneticists, have done a really good job of changing the bird. So making the bird more susceptible to, or sorry, more
Robust.
capable, excuse me, more capable of maintaining long production cycles. And so it's not unusual to see production cycles up to 100 weeks of age. Whereas, 20, 25 years ago, 70 weeks of age, maybe 80 before a molt was normal. And so these longer production cycles are without a molt. So of course the costs of molting, having birds out of production for a period of time, the cost of replacement pullets all goes down. So there's a strong economic incentive. And a big part of that is the geneticists have selected for both a better persistency, so they maintain high levels of production for a longer period of time. And probably even more important is that the geneticists have selected for a very slow increase in egg size. So we know that as the birds get older, their body weight increases even a little bit, but over time, the egg size increases. And as the egg gets bigger, it's the hen has a fixed ability to deposit calcium carbonate on the eggshell. And so as the eggs get bigger, there's the same amount of calcium carbonate, the same amount of shell material to put on an individual egg. And so as the eggs get bigger with a fixed amount of shell material, the shells have to get thinner. And so often the reason that we would see flocks being depopulated was in part production, but a big part of it was shell quality. So by selecting for a very slow increase in egg size, what the primary breeders have done is they have selected for a more capable, a bird that's more capable of maintaining shell quality for a longer period of time. So that's the context. Now, the challenge with this is that when we feed these birds for a long period of time, they produce a lot more eggs over their lifetime. And so we see the effects of cumulative effects of problems that maybe happen much earlier in the bird's life. So we can see problems with bone quality, so an excessive mobilization of the structural bone of the birds. We can also see problems with shell quality, and a lot of that. My research with long production cycles, as much as possible, I try to start with the pullet. So when the pullet chick arrives, that's when I start. I try to do my research is starting right from the beginning. And when I talk to producers, it's something that I really stress as being important is the pullet is an investment. And so, if we don't manage the pullet properly, if we're not doing the right things with the pullet, we might save some money and have a pullet that's cheaper to produce. But really, we want to have a bird that when she starts laying eggs, she's in the best possible shape and she's able to sustain those long production cycles. And so it becomes really important to manage pullet body weight, make sure that the bird is gaining the weight that she needs to, and according to a pattern. So we might be able to force the bird very quickly up to the right body weight, but that might not be the right body composition. We might have a fat, short, small framed pullet rather than the appropriate size with appropriate fat reserves, appropriate muscle reserves, appropriate calcium reserves, so that when she starts laying eggs, she can support. And then, that period up to peak production is also very important, because that's the hen is transitioning from having a relatively low set of nutrient requirements for energy, for calcium, for protein, amino acids, to suddenly she's producing an egg every single day, and she has to put out calcium, and she has to put out protein, and she has to put out energy, fat, in the form of the egg yolk. And so if the birds are underweight, or if the birds are not eating enough, they're actually mobilizing body reserves in order to support egg formation. And so if they don't have the right body size and the right body composition, they'll reach a peak very quickly, but then they come down and there's a post-peak check. So basically they don't go through a molt, but essentially their body says, okay, we haven't got enough nutrients to keep doing this. We're going to slow down for a little bit, decrease egg production. We're going to gain body weight and fat and protein, and then come back and reach our and start producing more eggs again. The problem is they don't ever reach that curve, that production curve that they should, and so we lose eggs all the way along the production cycle.
Wow, so interesting. Pullet period is truly investment.
Exactly. Yeah. So, we want to manage those pullets to be in the best shape that they possibly can be, so that they're ready to have those long production cycles.
Mm-hmm. Let's say that if I poorly manage my pullets during the pullet period, so what can I do during the next period, the laying period, to adjust, to get
Right.
good egg production also still?
Yeah. So one of the things I like to remind producers is that, especially with these long production cycles, I think sometimes there's the temptation to try and bring the birds into production as quickly as you possibly can, because the idea is, well, if they're not laying eggs, they're not making me money. And so the sooner those birds start laying eggs, the better it's going to be. Well, if you get an extra week of production on the front end, if you bring the birds into production a week early and they're not ready, you could lose 20 weeks of production at the end, because the bird goes through a molt, or it breaks a bone, or it dies. And so I encourage people that, this is a long production cycle. That's a lot of stress on the birds. And if we manage them properly, they can handle it. So make sure the birds are at the right body weight. Make sure the birds are uniform. The flock is uniform, because we don't want birds coming into production 3 weeks ahead of other birds, because for those 3 weeks, those birds have different requirements. And which one are we going to feed? Are we going to over provide nutrients to the bird that's not laying? Are we going to under provide nutrients to the bird that is laying? So it really has a negative impact on the overall flock production when we don't have a uniform flock. So the best thing to do is bring the birds, weigh the birds frequently, make sure they're on target for body weight. Flesh them. So when you're weighing the birds, feel the keel bone. And most of the management guides have instructions on how to do this, and how to evaluate whether there's enough muscle cover and fat cover. So do that during the pullet phase. And if the birds are underweight, or if they haven't got the fat and the protein reserves, you're better off delaying photostimulation for a little bit until the birds are at the right point. And I can almost guarantee producers that you will make more money waiting until the birds are ready. And you might lose a week of production, but you'll gain it on the back end. Those birds will be better able to handle those long production cycles. Mm-hmm. And I know we all want those birds to start laying as quickly as possible, because that's when the excitement starts. That's when we start making money. But overall, I really believe that if you need to, now, if the birds are on target and they're the right body condition, right body weight, and they're uniform, you can photostimulate them at the management guide recommended age. But sometimes that doesn't happen, especially with hot environments where the birds maybe aren't eating as much as we would hope they would. So the key is to look at what's the overall flock economics going to be.
Yeah. Talking about this long period production, if we touch this topic in relation to nutritional interventions, could you elaborate more about the calcium and phosphorus supply, because it is about the skeletal system, and maybe about enzymes also that we can do?
Yeah, so there's a few things that producers can do. I think one of the most important is when the birds are producing eggs, they should have a mixture of large particle and small particle calcium. So the large particle calcium will stay in the gizzard for a longer period of time at night, and will be gradually released into the blood supply. And at night is when most of the eggshell formation takes place. So when there's more calcium coming from the gut, being absorbed slowly over the night, it increases shell quality, it reduces the need to mobilize bone calcium. Now, we also want to have small particle calcium because in the morning, at sunrise or when the lights come on, the birds will start eating, and that small particle calcium will be very readily available. It will break down quickly, and it will, again, go to the blood supply and support that period first thing in the morning where the hen is still forming an eggshell before she lays the egg. So that's, I think, is critical. I think that ensuring adequate feed intake. So again, that can start with the pullet, is making sure the birds are eating enough so that when they start laying eggs, they can increase their consumption. So one of the tricks or one of the management techniques is include some fiber in the late grower and developer diet, so that the capacity of the digestive tract grows. They can have bigger meals, and they will want to have bigger meals because the fiber dilutes the energy and the nutrients. And then when we switch them to a high calcium diet, which is also quite dilute, they've got more capacity. Particularly in Asia, where heat stress can be a problem, particularly in open-sided houses, midnight feeding can be very effective. So midnight feeding, I don't think is a required technique. I don't think everybody needs to do it. But if you're seeing problems with shell quality because the birds are not able to consume enough because of the temperatures, one of the things that you can do is turn the lights on in the middle of the night for an hour or two, and allow the birds to consume feed. So what that does is typically the nights are cooler, and when the birds consume feed, the heat increment that is associated with that feed is happening in a cooler part of the day. And so it reduces the amount of heat stress during the day. Like I said, that's not a required technique, or it's not something that I feel that producers always need to do, but it can be a very effective technique to distribute the heat increment more throughout the day. So in terms of one of the important things I think that we're learning more about is I think if you look at typical recommendations from primary breeders for available phosphorus, I think they're a little bit too high. And so I think that if we look at reducing the level of available phosphorus, and I'm reluctant to give a specific number, but we've had good success at 0.3% available phosphorus. And then so phytase is sometimes a tricky question with laying hens. So my previous point was we're probably feeding too much phosphorus if we're following the management guide of 0.4 or 0.42, whatever it is. So if we're adding a phytase, what we want to do is we need to make sure that we're further decreasing the phosphorus so that we can take advantage of that phytase. Because if we use phytase and we're simply providing excess phosphorus, that has a negative impact on shell quality. So it's more complicated than I can get into in the time we have. But phosphorus can be effectively used in laying hen diets. Other non-starch polysaccharide degrading enzymes can be used. And so it liberates more of the energy that is available or that is present in the diet, but otherwise wouldn't be available. And then, yeah, just if you have a sudden problem, and depending on your labor situation in your facilities, we've had experiments where we've had a sudden shell quality problem related to a feed mixing error. There wasn't enough limestone put in. And so we top dressed with large particle limestone or oyster shell, and that very quickly help to minimize the problem. And so if you have the labor and if your facilities will allow that, it is a short-term solution while you wait for the feed problem to be corrected.
Mm-hmm. Is there any specific recommendation for Asian egg producers because they face situations like high temperature and also high humidity?
Yeah, so those two things together really make it challenging to maintain feed intake in laying hens. So again, it's not a nutritional solution, but if you can, manage the facility. So not everybody, of course, is able to have a tunnel ventilated house, but protection with shade. So minimizing the direct effects of the sun's rays. Can be a big factor. Using misting systems, if available. So basically, anything you can do to reduce heat stress, and so making sure that one of the things we can do to reduce heat stress is adding a larger proportion of the dietary energy as fat, because fat has very low heat increment. So there are things that we can do with our management and our facilities, some more expensive than others. There are some dietary things that we can do. We want to avoid imbalanced amino acid profiles, because when there's an amino acid imbalance, that generates a lot of heat, with the birds having to metabolize the protein and excrete the excess amino acids as uric acid. So,
okay. Anything else to add about this layer project?
Yeah, it's just we've been looking at phytase and combinations of enzymes, and we've had some very good results. So I think with the proper use of phytase, with the proper use of non-starch polysaccharide degrading enzymes, we can reduce feed costs, we can reduce nutrient pollution, and in particular, when we reduce the fermentation, if we can address that with some non-starch polysaccharide degrading enzymes, we can also reduce the heat stress in the birds.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Korver.
Thank you very much for talking to me tonight.
Thank you for listening to another Asian Agribiz podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever else you get your podcast from.